several down.
All right, hey, I'm making entry, all right?
I'm right behind
you.
you.
Go.
Go.
All right.
Hey, we got some down.
Two down.
Say that, police. If you're in here, anybody come out.
Police! We're calling her now.
We got a third down.
On a quiet day in Arizona, a routine response to a domestic violence call spiraled into one of the most devastating law enforcement tragedies the state has seen in years. Authorities say the violence began inside a home, but it did not stay there. According to investigators, Terrell Storey, 50, allegedly opened fire during a domestic violence incident, triggering a massive police response that would soon turn deadly. As officers moved in, a law enforcement helicopter was deployed to assist in the operation, a decision meant to protect lives on the ground. Instead, the mission ended in catastrophe. The helicopter crashed, killing Hunter Bennett, a 28-year-old state trooper in the early years of his service, and Robert Skankey, a 61-year-old veteran pilot with decades of flight experience. Two men from entirely different walks of life, one sworn to protect, the other trusted to keep others safe in the sky, were gone in an instant. Prosecutors allege that the chain of events leading to the crash began with Storey's actions, and they have charged him with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He is currently being held on a multi-million-dollar bond as the case moves forward through the justice system. What happened that day has raised painful questions about domestic violence, police response risks, and how a single incident can ripple outward with fatal consequences far beyond its original scene. This is not just the story of a suspect and a set of charges. It is the story of how one call for help ended with 2 lives lost, and a state searching for answers. According to investigators, what unfolded that day began as a domestic violence call, one of the most unpredictable and dangerous situations officers respond to. Police say the suspect, Terrell Storey, was involved in a volatile domestic incident when gunfire erupted. The exact sequence of shots, movements, and commands is still being examined, but authorities maintain that the threat level escalated rapidly enough to warrant a wide, multi-agency response. Domestic violence calls are treated with particular urgency because emotions are already heightened and the risk of sudden violence is severe. Officers arriving at such scenes must make split-second decisions with limited information, balancing the safety of potential victims, neighbors, and first responders. In this case, investigators say the situation did not stabilize. Instead, it intensified. As patrol units coordinated on the ground, a law enforcement helicopter was deployed to provide aerial visibility and tactical support. Such aircraft are commonly used to track suspects, relay real-time information, and reduce the need for risky pursuits at street level. The goal is often to contain a situation more safely, not to escalate it. But during the operation, the helicopter went down. The crash instantly turned a tense police response into a double tragedy. State Trooper Hunter Bennett, 28, and helicopter pilot Robert Skankey, 61, were killed. Officials confirmed both men died as a result of the crash, not from gunfire at the original scene. That distinction, however, did little to ease the shock felt across Arizona's law enforcement community. For investigators and prosecutors, the critical question became whether the initial actions that triggered the police response could legally and directly link the suspect to the deaths that followed. Their conclusion was firm. Yes, prosecutors alleged that the chain of events, from the domestic violence incident to the deployment of the helicopter and its fatal crash, was set in motion by Storey's actions. Under that theory, the deaths were not an unforeseeable accident, but a consequence of alleged criminal behavior. On that basis, Storey was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Legal experts note that cases like this hinge on the concept of causation. The prosecution does not need to prove that the accused personally caused the mechanical failure or the crash itself. Instead, they must argue that the deaths occurred during the commission of a dangerous felony, making them legally attributable to the suspect's conduct. It is a serious and complex standard, one that carries life-altering consequences. Storey is currently being held on a multi-million-dollar bond, signaling how seriously the court views the charges. Such high bonds are typically reserved for cases involving extreme violence, risk to public safety, or the possibility of flight. For now, he remains in custody as the case moves through preliminary hearings and toward trial. Meanwhile, the loss of Bennett and Skankey has rippled far beyond the courtroom. Hunter Bennett was described by colleagues as a young trooper dedicated to public service, still early in a career many believed would be long and distinguished. Robert Skankey, a seasoned pilot, brought decades of aviation experience to his role, entrusted with missions that demanded precision and calm under pressure. Their deaths have renewed scrutiny on the risks faced not only by officers on the ground, but also by those supporting operations from the air. In the days following the crash, tributes poured in from fellow officers, aviation professionals, and members of the public. Memorials appeared, flags were lowered, and departments across the state paused to honor the fallen. These gestures underscored a sobering reality. Modern policing often involves dangers that extend well beyond what the public sees. Investigators are continuing to analyze flight data, maintenance records, weather conditions, and communication logs to determine exactly how and why the helicopter went down. That inquiry is separate from the criminal case, but its findings could influence how similar operations are handled in the future. For prosecutors, the focus remains on accountability. They argue that when violence forces law enforcement into high-risk interventions, the responsibility for resulting deaths can extend back to the original act. Defense attorneys, on the other hand, are expected to challenge that narrative, questioning the causal link and the decision-making that led to the helicopter's deployment. As the legal process unfolds, the case is shaping up to test the boundaries of criminal responsibility in situations where indirect consequences prove fatal. It is a reminder that in the justice system, actions can carry weight far beyond their immediate moment, and that a single incident can set off a chain reaction with irreversible outcomes. The courtroom will ultimately decide how this story ends. For now, Arizona is left grappling with the aftermath. 2 lives lost, a community in mourning, and a case that raises difficult questions about risk, responsibility, and the true cost of violence. As the case moves deeper into the judicial system, the legal strategy on both sides is expected to focus on one central question: how far criminal responsibility extends when deadly consequences unfold indirectly. Prosecutors have already made their position clear. By charging the accused with 2 counts of first-degree murder, they are asserting that the deaths of the trooper and the pilot were not isolated accidents, but outcomes that occurred during and because of a violent felony in progress. In American criminal law, this approach is often tied to doctrines that hold suspects accountable for deaths that occur during the commission of dangerous crimes, even if the suspect did not personally cause the fatal act. Prosecutors argue that when someone allegedly introduces extreme violence into a situation, especially involving firearms, the resulting emergency response becomes a foreseeable consequence. Under this reasoning, the risk extends beyond the immediate scene and can encompass officers, bystanders, and support personnel involved in containing the threat. Defense attorneys are expected to challenge that logic forcefully. Legal experts say the defense will likely scrutinize every step taken after the initial incident: the decision to deploy aerial support, the operational planning, and the circumstances surrounding the helicopter crash itself. Their argument may center on whether the fatal outcome was truly foreseeable, or whether it resulted from independent decisions and factors outside the suspect's control. These questions are not merely academic. They go to the heart of how responsibility is assigned in complex, high-risk law enforcement operations. Courts have wrestled with similar cases in the past, often producing outcomes that hinge on minute details: timing, intent, and the nature of the alleged underlying crime. Beyond the courtroom, the tragedy has triggered a broader institutional review. Law enforcement agencies routinely analyze serious incidents to determine whether policies, training, or equipment need to change. The helicopter crash is now the subject of a detailed aviation investigation, examining mechanical integrity, pilot workload, visibility, weather conditions, and communication with ground units. Such investigations operate independently of criminal proceedings. Their goal is not to assign blame, but to prevent future loss of life. Still, their findings can have ripple effects, informing policy updates, influencing courtroom arguments, and shaping public understanding of what went wrong. For many in the law enforcement community, the deaths have reinforced the dangers inherent in responding to domestic violence calls. These incidents are widely regarded as among the most volatile officers face. Emotions are raw, information is incomplete, and situations can escalate without warning. The added layer of aerial support, while often life-saving, introduces its own risks. Communities across Arizona have responded with a mix of grief and reflection. Memorial services honored the fallen, while public officials acknowledge the sacrifice involved in policing and emergency aviation. At the same time, advocates have renewed calls for addressing domestic violence at earlier stages, before disputes escalate to lethal confrontations and massive emergency responses. The accused remains in custody on a multi-million-dollar bond, a clear signal of how seriously the court views the charges. High bonds are typically imposed when judges believe a defendant poses a continued risk or faces charges severe enough to warrant strict controls. For now, the legal process will move through hearings, motions, and eventually, a trial where evidence will be tested in open court. Families connected to the case are enduring profoundly different forms of pain. The loved ones of the victims are mourning sudden, violent losses tied to public service. Meanwhile, relatives of the accused are confronting the shock and stigma that come with high-profile criminal allegations. These parallel experiences underscore a grim reality. Cases like this fracture lives far beyond the headlines. Public attention has also turned to the concept of deterrence. Prosecutors often argue that holding suspects accountable for all resulting harm sends a clear message, that violence carries consequences that extend far beyond its immediate target. Critics counter that such charges risk stretching legal responsibility too far, potentially blurring the line between direct action and unintended outcomes. As the case proceeds, every development will be closely watched. Court filings, expert testimony, and investigative reports will help shape the narrative presented to jurors and the public alike. The outcome could influence how similar cases are charged in the future, particularly those involving indirect fatalities during police operations. What remains undisputed is the scale of the loss. Two professionals, one early in his law enforcement career, the other a seasoned aviator, were killed while supporting a mission intended to protect others. Their deaths have become a stark reminder that violence often produces consequences no one can fully control once it is unleashed. The justice system now faces the task of weighing responsibility, intent, and consequence with care. It must balance accountability with fairness and grief with the rule of law. As Arizona watches the proceedings unfold, the case stands as a sobering example of how a single incident can cascade into tragedy, leaving courts, communities, and families to grapple with its aftermath. The final chapter has yet to be written, but whatever the verdict, the questions raised by this case about violence, response, and responsibility are likely to echo long after the courtroom doors close. In the days and weeks following the fatal helicopter crash, the effects of the tragedy extended far beyond the immediate criminal case. Across Arizona, law enforcement agencies entered a period of collective mourning, one marked by memorial services, lowered flags, and moments of silence that reflected the magnitude of the loss. State Trooper Hunter Bennett was remembered as young, driven, and committed to service. Colleagues described him as someone who took pride in the uniform and understood the risks that came with the job, even early in his career. For many officers, his death struck especially hard because it represented a future cut short, potential decades of service erased in a single moment. Robert Skankey's passing carried a different but equally heavy symbolism. As a veteran helicopter pilot, he represented the often unseen side of law enforcement, professionals who operate behind the scenes, providing critical support that keeps officers and civilians safer on the ground. Aviation units are frequently called into the most dangerous situations, yet their risks rarely receive sustained public attention unless something goes wrong. This crash forced that reality into the spotlight. While families and colleagues grieved, investigators began the slow, methodical work of determining exactly how the helicopter went down. Aviation investigations are among the most detailed and technical inquiries conducted after any incident. Specialists examine wreckage patterns, engine components, maintenance logs, and onboard systems. Weather data, air traffic communications, and pilot decision-making are analyzed frame by frame, minute by minute. Officials have emphasized that this process takes time and that early conclusions can be misleading. Mechanical issues, environmental conditions, and operational pressures often intersect in complex ways. The goal of the investigation is not only to explain what happened, but to identify how similar tragedies can be prevented in the future. At the same time, internal reviews within law enforcement agencies have been underway. These assessments focus on tactical decisions made during the response to the domestic violence incident. Questions being examined include how quickly the situation escalated, what information was available to commanders at each stage, and whether alternative strategies could have reduced risk. Such reviews are standard after line-of-duty deaths, but they are rarely simple. Every major incident forces agencies to confront uncomfortable realities about the dangers inherent in policing and the limits of control in fast-moving, high-stress situations. Even decisions made with the intent to save lives can carry unintended consequences. Public reaction to the case has been intense and, at times, divided. Many voices have expressed unwavering support for law enforcement, emphasizing that officers and pilots knowingly place themselves in harm's way to protect others. Vigils and online tributes highlighted gratitude for service and sorrow for families left behind. Others have focused on broader systemic questions. Domestic violence advocates have pointed out that calls like the one that triggered this response often involve long histories of prior incidents, warning signs, and missed opportunities for intervention. They argue that preventing escalation earlier through social services, protective orders, or community support could reduce the likelihood of violent confrontations that demand massive police responses. The case has also reignited discussion about the legal standards used to assign responsibility in situations where deaths occur indirectly. Supporters of the prosecution's approach argue that accountability must extend to all foreseeable consequences of violent acts. From this perspective, introducing gunfire into a domestic dispute creates a chain reaction that places countless lives at risk, including those responding to contain the threat. Critics counter that this framework risks oversimplifying complex operational decisions. They question whether it is fair to attribute responsibility for an aviation accident, potentially influenced by mechanical or environmental factors, to a suspect who was not present at the crash site. These debates reflect deeper tensions within the justice system about causation, intent, and proportionality. Media coverage has played a significant role in shaping public understanding of the case. News organizations have carefully navigated the balance between honoring the victims and reporting on the allegations against the accused. Legal analysts frequently note that high-profile cases demand particular care, as early narratives can harden public opinion long before a jury hears the evidence. For the accused, the legal process is only beginning. Being held on a multi-million-dollar bond signals that prosecutors and judges view the case as exceptionally serious. Pretrial motions, evidentiary hearings, and expert testimony are expected to take months, if not longer. Each step will be scrutinized, not only by the court, but by a public eager for clarity and closure. Behind the legal arguments and investigative reports lies a more human reality. Families of the victims are navigating grief under public attention, their personal loss intertwined with national conversations about policing and violence. They face anniversaries, empty seats at family gatherings, and the long process of rebuilding life after sudden tragedy. Meanwhile, those connected to the accused are confronting a different kind of turmoil. High-profile charges bring intense scrutiny, isolation, and uncertainty, long before any verdict is reached. The justice system presumes innocence until proven guilty, but public perception often moves faster than the courts. As months pass, the story continues to evolve. New details may emerge from investigative findings, court filings, or expert analyses. Each development adds another layer to a case already defined by complexity and loss. What remains constant is the central truth that 2 lives were lost during a response intended to protect others. For Arizona, the case has become a point of reflection about how communities address domestic violence, how law enforcement manages risk, and how the legal system assigns responsibility when tragedy unfolds in unexpected ways. These are not questions with easy answers, but they are ones that demand careful consideration. As the investigation and prosecution move forward, the spotlight will remain fixed on the courtroom and the agencies involved. The outcome will not undo the damage done, but it may shape future policies, legal precedents, and public understanding of accountability. In the end, this case is not just about a single incident or a single defendant. It is about the fragile line between order and chaos, the unpredictable ripple effects of violence, and the enduring cost paid by those who step forward when others are in danger. As this case moves toward its decisive phase, attention is steadily shifting from what happened to what it ultimately means for the justice system, for law enforcement, and for the public watching closely. The courtroom will soon become the central arena where months of investigation, grief, and debate are distilled into arguments, evidence, and testimony. At the heart of the prosecution's case is a simple but powerful claim that violence does not exist in isolation. Prosecutors argue that when a suspect allegedly introduces deadly force into a volatile situation, every foreseeable consequence that follows carries legal weight. In their view, the deaths that occurred during the police response were not random or detached from the original act, but part of a continuous chain set into motion that day. To support that position, the state is expected to rely heavily on timelines, expert analysis, and established legal precedent. Jurors may hear from law enforcement commanders who explain why aerial support was requested, from aviation experts who describe the risks inherent in police helicopter operations, and from legal specialists who outline how responsibility is defined when fatalities occur during dangerous felonies. The defense, meanwhile, is expected to focus on separation, drawing lines between the initial incident and the helicopter crash that claimed 2 lives. Attorneys are likely to argue that the actions of multiple agencies, the operational choices made during the response, and the technical factors involved in the crash all represent independent variables. Their case may hinge on convincing jurors that the fatal outcome was too far removed, legally and practically, from the accused's conduct to justify first-degree murder charges. These competing narratives place jurors in a difficult position. They are being asked not only to assess facts, but to interpret causation, foreseeability, and intent, concepts that sit at the intersection of law, ethics, and common sense. The verdict will depend on whether the jury believes the prosecution has bridged that gap beyond a reasonable doubt. Outside the courtroom, institutional consequences are already taking shape. Law enforcement agencies across Arizona are reviewing aerial deployment protocols, communication procedures, and risk assessment models. Aviation units, in particular, are examining how operational pressure, situational urgency, and environmental factors combine during high-stakes missions. Such reviews are rarely about assigning blame. Instead, they aim to extract lessons, sometimes painfully learned, that can reduce risk in the future. Changes may involve updated training, revised criteria for helicopter deployment, or enhanced coordination between air and ground units. Even incremental adjustments can carry life-saving implications. The case has also intensified public discussion around domestic violence, a factor that often sits at the beginning of tragedies but receives less attention once violence escalates. Advocates point out that domestic violence incidents are frequently preceded by warning signs, prior reports, restraining orders, or ongoing conflicts known within families or communities. Addressing those signals earlier, they argue, could prevent confrontations from reaching a level that demands massive law enforcement intervention. For families of the victims, these broader debates offer little immediate comfort. Their loss is personal, permanent, and deeply felt. Memorials and honors acknowledge sacrifice, but they do not replace the presence of a son, colleague, or loved one. Grief unfolds privately, even as the case remains publicly dissected. The aviation community has also felt the impact. Helicopter pilots operating in law enforcement roles accept a unique set of risks, often flying in challenging conditions, at low altitudes, under intense time pressure. The crash has prompted renewed conversations about safety margins, equipment standards, and the psychological demands placed on pilots during emergency operations. Media coverage continues to shape how the story is understood. Responsible reporting has emphasized verified facts and court filings while avoiding speculation. Still, public perception is influenced by headlines, expert commentary, and the emotional weight of the losses involved. This dynamic underscores the importance of the trial itself, where evidence is tested under strict legal standards rather than public opinion. As the proceedings move forward, several outcomes remain possible. A conviction would reinforce a broad interpretation of accountability, signaling that indirect consequences of violent acts can carry the gravest criminal penalties. An acquittal, or reduction of charges, could narrow that interpretation, emphasizing limits on how far responsibility can extend when multiple factors intervene. Regardless of the verdict, the case is likely to be cited in future legal arguments and academic discussions. It touches on enduring questions about justice in complex systems, where actions ripple outward intersecting with decisions made by others under pressure. For Arizona, the tragedy has become a point of collective reckoning. It has highlighted the dangers faced by those who respond to emergencies, the cascading impact of domestic violence, and the challenges courts face when assigning responsibility in cases shaped by chaos and urgency. The legal process is designed to move deliberately, not quickly. That patience can be frustrating for those seeking answers, but it exists to ensure fairness, for victims, for defendants, and for the integrity of the system itself. When the final gavel falls, it will represent not closure, but a resolution shaped by evidence and law. What remains after that resolution is the lesson. Violence, once unleashed, rarely stays contained. Its consequences can travel far beyond their point of origin, touching lives that had no direct connection to the initial act. Understanding that reality is essential, not only for courts, but for communities working to prevent future tragedies. As this case reaches its conclusion, it stands as a sobering reminder of how quickly ordinary moments can turn catastrophic, and how responsibility, once invoked, can echo through institutions, families, and history itself. If you want more in-depth, fact-based breakdowns of the stories shaping our world, like this video to support serious journalism, share it so others can understand the full picture, and subscribe to the channel for more cinematic, news-style investigations you won't find anywhere else. The stories matter, the truth matters, and we'll keep bringing it to you.